Imagine walking into a courtroom where the accused isn't alive. The defendant, pale, lifeless, has been dug up from his grave, propped onto a throne, and dressed in ceremonial robes. A trial unfolds in grotesque detail as judges interrogate a corpse. This isn't fiction. This is history. A tale so bizarre and chilling, it feels impossible. Yet, in the year 897, Pope Stephen VI did exactly that, placing his deceased predecessor, Pope Formosus, on trial. Why would a leader of faith exhume a man and convict him after death? What madness led to such a ghastly spectacle? Today, we step back in time to uncover one of the darkest, most haunting episodes in papal history. A story of obsession, revenge, and unimaginable power. The year was 897 AD. It was a time of upheaval and bloodshed, with the power of the papacy teetering on the edge of chaos. In Rome, where marble and ruin coexisted beneath the eternal sun, the air crackled with tension. Alliances were forged in shadows, betrayals whispered in dark halls. At the center of it all was Pope Stephen VI, newly elected, ruthless, and desperate to cement his rule. I first heard the rumors in the crowded streets of Rome, where merchants hawked their wares and beggars tugged at the sleeves of hurried passers-by. "They're digging up a body," someone muttered. "The Pope's gone mad." The details spread like fire through dry wood. Pope Stephen had ordered the exhumation of his predecessor, Pope Formosus, who had been dead for 9 months. 9 months. I couldn't fathom it. What crime could warrant dragging a rotting corpse from its rest? For the next few days, the city vibrated with curiosity and unease. People gathered in hushed clusters, speaking of omens and curses. The markets, the taverns, every corner of Rome buzzed with a single word: trial. And when the day of that trial arrived, I was there, an onlooker among the crowd pressing into the Lateran Basilica. The air was stifling and thick with the stench of old incense and something worse, something I didn't want to name. The basilica loomed, its grandeur spoiled by an undercurrent of dread. The room was packed, people crammed shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks for a glimpse of the unthinkable. I pushed forward, my pulse pounding, until I could see the altar where the proceedings would unfold. And there he sat. Pope Formosus, or what was left of him, was seated on a throne, his decaying body draped in papal vestments that hung limp and tattered. His skeletal hands were folded over his lap, his skull barely concealed beneath what remained of his skin. I could hear women stifling gasps behind me, a few whispering prayers in trembling voices. My stomach churned. It was wrong. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was unnatural, yet I couldn't look away. Beside the corpse stood Pope Stephen VI, his robes immaculate, his expression wild with something I couldn't name. Was it rage, triumph, or madness? "Bring forth the charges," Stephen's voice rang out, booming through the cavernous space. A group of clergy stood to the side, faces pale as parchment. One of them, barely able to keep his voice steady, began to read the accusations. Pope Formosus, it was said, had committed perjury. He had ascended to the papacy illegally, and for that he must answer, even in death. What followed can only be described as a performance of horror. Clergy members served as Formosus's jury, their expressions frozen in shock. A deacon, shaking so hard his voice cracked, spoke on behalf of the dead pope, his words punctuated by the occasional sob. I wanted to shout, to stop the madness, but no one dared. Around me, I saw faces pale and frozen in disbelief. We were all trapped in that room, bound by our inability to defy what was happening. Pope Stephen stormed back and forth, screaming accusations as though his enemy could rise and refute him. He gestured wildly to Formosus' corpse. "This man is guilty, a fraud, a liar. He has poisoned the holy seat of St. Peter." His voice echoed, hollow and angry, as though the church itself recoiled from the sound. The dead man's silence was his only answer, his empty sockets staring blindly at his accuser. The storm raged for hours. The heat in the basilica grew unbearable, sweat dripping down my back as the air thickened with misery. When the verdict was read, I felt my knees go weak. Guilty. Pope Stephen's face twisted with satisfaction. "Strip him," he commanded, his voice dripping with venom. And so they did. Priests stepped forward, their hands shaking as they stripped Formosus of his vestments. They tore the papal ring from his shriveled finger and cast it to the floor. Finally, they severed the fingers he'd once used to bless his followers, those skeletal, unoffending digits, and held them aloft as if they had conquered some great foe. By the end, I could barely breathe. Pope Formosus' corpse, now disgraced and mutilated, was dragged from the basilica and tossed into the Tiber River, as though to erase his existence entirely. But you can't erase something like that. Not truly. The people of Rome were outraged, their murmurs rising to a roar in the following days. "The Pope has gone mad," they said. "God will strike him down." And perhaps God did. Within a year, Pope Stephen VI would meet his own brutal end. Imprisoned and strangled in his cell, his reign cut short by the very chaos he had unleashed. Formosus, it seemed, would have the final word after all. Looking back, I still struggle to understand what I witnessed. Some say Pope Stephen's actions were driven by revenge, others by political pressure. Formosus had once supported rival factions, after all. Was this grotesque spectacle Stephen's way of erasing his predecessor's influence? Or was it something darker? A man who had lost all reason in his hunger for power. Whatever the answer, I will never forget the sight of that corpse on the throne, nor the madness in Stephen's eyes. And even now, I wonder, did Formosus' spirit haunt him? Did the papal ring, torn so violently from his finger, return in his dreams? Did those severed hands bless him, silently and vengefully as he drew his final breath? Until next time, remember this. History hides its darkest horrors in plain sight, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. Thank you for joining me on this haunting tale. Sleep well, if you can.